can't imagine Oral Roberts ever making that rookie mistake. Oh well. So I want to start with a personal story as I move along to talk about the prosperity gospel. So when I was, 13 years old, which is shocking to me, having been a parent since then, but when I was 13 years old, I got my first babysitting jobs. Why anybody would trust me to do that, I still don't know, but anyway. And I remember the first time I got paid. It was an experience I didn't expect, but it was a really deep experience. It was fairly easy work. The kids I took care of were, they were really fun to be with. But for all kinds of reasons that I won't go into, that payment and that possibility of being able to have money that was for me, that I could use the way I wanted to, gave me a feeling of independence and a feeling of security that I hadn't imagined it would. It started what has been kind of a lifelong perspective of being glad when I don't have to rely on others for my own needs to be met. It hasn't turned out, for the most part, to be a particularly either spiritual or helpful perspective on money, but it helps me to remember that when I reflect on such things as stewardship drives and fundraising efforts, particularly efforts in church. Money is almost as much of a dirty word in church as sex or other bodily functions. I was going to use the names, but even I get scared when I'm up here to say things like, whatever. Particularly in Protestant or congregations that come from the Protestant, traditions in the United States, congregations that are not primarily congregations of color, there's a sense that we don't talk about money, right? We don't. Money is, like I said, a dirty word. As I've understood it over the years, people would rather get triple root canal than ask for money. And in the long run, we extend this to not talking about our personal finances. For many of us, even sharing what our salary might be or not be, all of this becomes shrouded in secrecy. Now, how many of you have heard the term the prosperity gospel? Okay. So many of you are probably old enough to remember Jim and Tammy Faye Baker or Oral Roberts. Yeah. Remember the t-shirt? I ran into Tammy Faye at the mall. Did you guys ever see that? It was like a sort of silhouette of her with all the mascara running. It was hilarious. Anyway, I digress. As it turns out, I'll describe more the prosperity gospel, but as it turns out, it really burst on the United States religious scene in the 1970s, really, really big. But the history of this movement goes back a long, long time. In fact, one of the people who most inspired the prosperity gospel was a Unitarian ancestor, Ralph Waldo Emerson. With Emerson's influence and his emphasis on the individual, with his emphasis on individual achievement and self-reliance, a little bit of what I experienced with my first paycheck. He became part of the inspiration for this movement. He also became the inspiration for this movement when he said, something along the lines of every man, I'm pretty sure he didn't say every human, and they didn't include women in that category of man, but anyway, every man carries the seeds of divinity, the seeds of God inside himself. It is our institutions that hold us back. Sounds like a campaign slogan for the current Republican frontrunner. You can laugh even though it's sad. What he and other transcendentalists were saying is that why be subject to the tyranny of a congregation or a church? Why be subject? Why believe that the holy and the divine can only be found in a place like this when it can be found anywhere where it can be found inside of ourselves? As you know, the Transcendentalists talked about finding the divine in nature and finding the divine in places outside of Christianity, which of course, both the Unitarians and the Universalists were, until the late 19th century, primarily Christian. Both of these pieces would lead to, over the decades, something called the power of mind. It began with faith healing. It began with folks who, maybe with or without a theological education, started to teach a gospel, started to teach a religious perspective that says, if you can connect through faith with that divine part that is inside of you, and if you can do that strongly enough and consistently enough, you will be healed. And I, as a faith leader, can help you get there. And God will take away all of your sin, and you will be transformed, and you will have perfect health. This became an incredibly popular movement. These folks, there's a picture of one who was famous at the time. His name was Carl Lake. And he drove around the country with, he was married twice, both of his wives, with a truck that had a sign on it that said, faith healing have healed thousands. And thousands of people would come and listen and feel inspired and heard by this message. They would feel that God was there to help them. So I'm not poking fun at this message. And over time, into the 20th century, we Unitarians were exploring too. We were pushing the boundaries as the Emersons and others had told us to push, and we were saying, we don't want to be trapped inside one faith tradition. We don't want to be trapped in a building. Let's explore, I say appropriate, but they said explore Hinduism and other Eastern religions, and let's the world seemed like it was opening to these different possibilities. By the time of the Second World War and then coming into the 70s, somebody, I wish I remember, I think it was the wife of one of the first radio evangelists who said, wait a minute, if God doesn't want us to be sick, I'm pretty sure God doesn't want us to be poor. That's a quote. And so the gospel of healing began to evolve into a gospel of prosperity. And again, a whole generation. Oral Roberts was the first. He grew up in very, very deep poverty, who made it big. But as you know, many others have come since. And this continues to be a huge part of religiosity in our country. And so the paradigm is this. Once again, if you can connect If I can connect with this part of me that is God, and I can feel this faith really, really strongly, I will not only be blessed with health, I will be blessed with a lot of money. I will be blessed with prosperity. And the way other people will know that I've been blessed by prosperity is by the amount I give. Get the catch-22 in all of this. So I remember one day I was channel surfing. I don't even have any idea why, but I was channel surfing and I landed on an extremely successful televangelist of this type. Her name is Joyce Meyer, and has anybody watched her? I was riveted because in that particular TV sermon, she was talking about her plastic surgery. And I thought, you go, girl. And she was like, why wouldn't, she had plastic surgery already, but she was going to get more because why wouldn't God want me to look good? I'm like, amen. And all of the white middle-class women in the audience were nodding. I mean, that's relatable, right? I mean, I'm actually being really serious. This was, and it was revelatory to me because in my mind, you don't talk about plastic surgery from the pulpit. Sort of like money. And I've watched some of her sermons since then and some of her things, and things come from, they all quote things from the Bible. They don't usually tell the story about how the camel will pass through the eye of the needle more easily than a rich man will make it into heaven, but you can see why that wouldn't be told. But there are parts of the gospel text that talk about God loving us and God wanting the best for us. The reason I tell you all of this, because what's important from this long tradition in our religion in this country, is because it's like the marriage of the secular American dream and a definition of faith, where somehow they become part of the same thing and they become a transaction. If I do my part well enough, I get the reward. If I demonstrate the right kind of faith, I'll get rich and I'll be healed from whatever it is that's hurting me. And it might be easy for someone like me to say, but we don't do that, right? That we're a different kind of faith tradition. But I think in some ways, we do that too. We imagine that the giving of money, or the giving even of time, that's time and treasure that we're called on to give, also becomes a transaction. Maybe, and I've heard these exact same things that I'm going to share with you. I don't come to church to be called a racist. I told the music committee that I wanted to be part of the band and the drumming circle, but they started rehearsals and never let me know. I shared a lot of really good ideas with the finance committee, and they rejected everything I said. And all of those people felt that they needed to leave. One very straightforward one, which I heard on a weekly basis for many months: if you don't stop doing candles of sharing, I'm going to take all, and I'm one of the biggest donors, and I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go to another church. These things aren't common, but they made me think about how how sometimes someone like me will ask a congregation, what is it that you want? Right? What is it that you expect? What is important to you when you come to church? And sometimes that gets tricky when it gets to the point of feeling like a transaction. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Except to say, or except to offer, maybe a different or a shift in the paradigm. Maybe if all of us, myself included, I'll put myself first in line, we're able to view generosity, our approach towards giving, from a spiritual rather than a transactional perspective. Why do I come to church? I come to church because something here nourishes my soul. The community gives me a sense of belonging. All of those things because my children learn a different way of living in the world. All of those things are really important, and many, many others. Because I get to make music or whatever, all those things are important. But sometimes I wonder where the other side of the equation is. What do I come to church to give to the world? What do we, as a community, how do we minister to the world? Should folks come here because of what they'll get? Or should folks come here for what they can be transformed into giving with one another and the world? And it's not all or one or the other. Do you follow what I'm saying? What can we give? What are we here? Not just, obviously, stuff doesn't work without money. But I'm thinking about that perspective. How many times and how many congregations, especially during COVID, when so many communities lost, we lost people who, frankly, after being away from church for a year, were like, I don't really need to go back. People's habits changed. We say, how can we get people to come back? Which is a valid question, but I think, what can we give so that people feel that something here calls them to be their better selves? In Unitarian Universalism, we have a lot of cultural pressures for the ways we talk or don't talk about money, for the pressures we feel to spend and do our ministry based on how much comes in. And sometimes I think, and this is not a veiled message about you, it's something I've experienced in every congregation I've ever been a part of, either as a member or as a minister. Sometimes I wonder who's dictating the mission of a congregation. Is it the amount we collect? Or is it the call of the people in the pews? Is it the call of the gathered community? Because with all due respect to Ralph Waldo Emerson, one individual alone can never do what an entire community can do when we link arms together and say we're here to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit the prisoner. I remember Joel Osteen and his wife Victoria got in trouble one time because they wouldn't let refugees from the hurricane that hit Texas into their, 30,000 person sanctuary. I have sanctuary envy when it comes to that. So I raise these questions with you. Part of my work as an interim is to raise the questions that are maybe thorny or difficult. And they're difficult for me too. So I'll close with another story that happens over and over again. Now, as a person of my advanced age, I have a committee on my head that talks to me whenever a money decision is involved. My committee has issues. So when I'm going in and checking out from a hotel and I'm deciding how much to leave as a tip, this always comes up. And I look in my wallet and all I find is $20 bills, and a committee member says, that's too much to leave for a tip. That's usually the first committee member who speaks. And then another committee pipes up, shut up. Okay, how can I get change, says a third committee member. You can't without having to go all the way downstairs and all the way back upstairs. Well, how about if you just give the $20? Says the quietest committee member. And when I do, which is most of the time, it's not automatic, then it feels different. Because honestly, $20 is not. But that first thought is still, that's too much. Or if someone is grumpy in a restaurant and they don't give me really great service and I'm like, all right, you're getting a 13.5% tip. Yeah, I have a lot of spiritual ground to grow into. And then I go, I'd be grumpy all the time if I did that work. So I leave you with these random thoughts. I'm going to invite Larry to come speak. Church promises us exactly what we are prepared to give and do for one another, understanding that all of us are going to have different circumstances. But know that every question, every impulse, every decision is honored in this place. Blessed be.